Despair is the spiritual condition that tells you that tomorrow will be exactly the same as today. The 1993 film Groundhog Day captures the feeling well. In the film, Phil Connors, who's played by Bill Murray, finds himself stuck in a time loop, destined to live out the same day over and over again. Nothing he does can change the outcome. Well, Phil gradually becomes depressed and desperate for a way to escape the endless loop. Nothing changes. There is no prospect of a better tomorrow, so no hope. Just the desperate feeling of being stuck. I wonder how many of us have felt like that this year. I know that I have, awake in the early hours of the morning, wondering if life will ever return to normal. Facing another day stuck indoors, another day of meetings on Zoom, while missing friends and family. That is why hope is so important. It is the antidote to despair. You see, hope is the conviction that tomorrow can be better than today. A vision of a different future, a better future. Hope motivates us and it inspires action. But some people think that in order to feel hopeful, all their suffering must cease. This isn't true. Hope is not the absence of difficulty. Hope is found within the difficulty. It was G.K. Chesterton who said, "Hope means hoping when things are hopeless, or it is no virtue at all." Rick and Kay Warren run one of the largest churches in North America, and Kay recently opened up about a period of depression and hopelessness that she felt following the suicide of their youngest son, Matthew, who was aged 27. She said this: "I used to think that life was hills and valleys. You go through a dark time, then you go to the mountain, back and forth. But I don't believe that anymore. Rather than life being hills and valleys, I believe it's kind of like two rails on a railroad track. And at all times you have something good and something bad in your life. No matter how good your life and things are going, there is always something bad that needs to be worked on. And yet, no matter how bad things are in your life, there is always something good to thank God for." Friends, this year has been a challenge for all of us. And I guess it may well be for several months yet, especially as we live with these new Tier 4 restrictions. But that does not mean that we have to live in despair. It is in the darkest places that the light shines brightest. Almost every Christmas we sing, "O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep the silent stars go by. Yet in the dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight." I love that last line. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. The two parallel tracks that the Warrens spoke about, the one of hope and the other of fear, are both met in thee tonight. And we bring them both with us here today, all our hopes and all our fears, and we find them both in the Nativity story, the birth of Jesus, the Christ child. Is in this story that hope becomes flesh. You see, for years the people of God, the people of the Old Testament, had been waiting, longing for one who would come and rescue them. Oppressed by one superpower after another, they had lived as slaves with the boot of empire on their necks, stuck, helpless, downtrodden and full of despair. Through the Psalms, they cry to God, "How long, O Lord? How long will you ignore our cries for help? Save us." It is the prophets who start to sow the seeds of hope, whispering the rumours of a new story, that one day God's chosen one will come to save us, one who will champion the orphan and the widow, the poor and the oppressed. As Isaiah says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those that live in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. For to us a child is born, for us a son is given, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. A vision of a new and a more hopeful future. The prophet Micah, writing 700 years before the birth of Jesus, said this, "Bethlehem, though you are one of the smallest towns in Judah, out of you I will bring forth a ruler, one whose family line goes back to ancient times. And his people will live in safety, because all over the earth people will acknowledge his greatness." The prophets are pointing God's people to a vision of a better future, a hope-filled future, where God will rescue them, redeem them, bring them salvation, literally save them, bring them redemption. It is that promise, it is that vision that we remember as we celebrate Christmas. That in this Christ child, hope is born. God and mankind are united in Jesus, and not only for God's people, but for all of humankind, for you and I. We are invited into God's story. A story that Jesus called the kingdom of heaven, which has nothing to do with where you go when you die, but more about a vision of how to live well here and now. To live a life full of love, justice, forgiveness, inclusion and humility. It is a vision of hope. The declaration that because of this baby, Emmanuel, God with us, the future can be brighter. That through this child, his birth, his life, his death, and his resurrection, the future is brighter. That despite all the challenges of life, all will be well, and all manner of things will be well. This is no vain optimism. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm anything but an optimist. Hope is always based on something concrete. Hope demands an action. You see, there is a big difference between a hope and a wish. I may wish that one day I will win the lottery, but unless I buy a ticket, it is an empty wish. Once I buy a ticket, once I participate, then I'm entitled to hope that one day I might win the jackpot. Words have to become flesh. And that, friends, is what we remember. The word that became flesh. The church has a word for this. We call it the incarnation. And the invitation of Christmas is, as we remember the incarnation of Jesus, is to incarnate his life and values into this world. This year we've seen plenty of examples of hope in action. Selfless acts of love and kindness. Doctors, nurses, hospital cleaners, refuse collectors, shop workers, lorry drivers, carers, working tirelessly to keep people fed, cared for, and in some cases alive. Acts of hope and kindness as neighbour has looked after neighbour by shopping or just by phone calling to keep loneliness at bay. Care for the most vulnerable, the lonely, keeping community, connection, and hope alive. And scientists who've been working quickly and diligently for a vaccine, and now for the NHS staff who will be distributing it across the country. Friends, it might have been a dark year, but there have also been many, many signs of hope. And if you want to experience more hope in your life this Christmas, then share it with others. As we act, as we love others, as we continue to live out Jesus' kingdom values, and where we share selfless acts of love and kindness, hope grows brighter. And that is how we will get through this. How we will get through the next few months of Tier 4 restrictions. As a church and as a community, fight despair by participating in the better world we want to see, by realizing the promise of Christmas as we let hope shine in the darkness.
O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of the dear Saviour's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error.